What if I told you two dead girls were reborn? And they remembered everything? This is the real story that has scientists, doctors, and even hardcore skeptics losing their minds, and it starts in a quiet English town called Hexham, just outside Newcastle. Bullseye our challenge? Prove the impossible. Or be haunted by it. May 5, 1957, a normal Sunday morning. Two sisters, dressed in their church clothes, walking to mass. Automobile bam. They are struck by a speeding car. Both killed instantly. The town shattered. The parents broken beyond repair. But then, bullseye exactly 18 months later. Their mother gives birth to twin girls. And that's when things get downright terrifying. Explosion symbol. These twins weren't just babies. They began doing things no baby should do. They knew the names of toys they'd never seen. They had birthmarks in the exact spots where the first girls were injured. And they described, in chilling detail, the crash that killed their sisters. How could this be possible? What followed would become one of the most documented and disturbing cases in human history. This wasn't a ghost story. This wasn't a myth. This was science vs. the supernatural. Books. For over 20 years, researchers from the University of Virginia studied these twins. Not internet theorists. Not ghost hunters. But real scientists. At the center of it all? Dr. Ian Stevenson, one of the most respected psychiatrists of the 20th century. He documented every detail. Every interview. Every freak coincidence that shouldn't be real, but was. His findings? Published in peer-reviewed medical journals. Still debated by top minds today. Warning sign # but let's rewind, because before the world knew the truth, Hexham was just a quiet town. The kind where everyone knew everyone, and Sunday church was the biggest event of the week. Until death shattered the rhythm. John and Florence Robertson had 6 children. They lived a quiet, faithful life. John ran a milk and grocery delivery business. Florence had left the Salvation Army to join her husband's Catholic faith. Family man, woman, girl, their world revolved around routine. Until routine became reincarnation. Loudspeaker, pause the video right now. Tell us where you're watching from and subscribe to Liturgy of Fear. Because in the next part, we're diving into Cyclone, the impossible memories. The phantom wounds. Round pushpin and the one night that changed everything. This is not folklore. This is not legend. This is the story that made even the most trusted scientists whisper. What if death isn't the end? You're looking at a normal family in a quiet English town. A mom. A dad. 4 sons. 2 daughters. And on paper? Everything seemed perfect. But what happened on May 5, 1957 would rip this family apart, and launch one of the most chilling reincarnation cases in history. Girl, meet Joanna and Jacqueline Robertson. Joanna, 11, was the little mother of the family, wise beyond her years, nurturing, creative, the glue of the household. Jacqueline, 6. Her shadow. Energetic, playful, obsessed with her big sister. She followed Joanna everywhere. They weren't just sisters. They were soul-bound. Footprints, same laughs. Same dreams. Same walk to church every Sunday, dressed in their best, skipping ahead of their parents down the quiet Hexham streets. But Jacqueline had something else, 2 small, eerie details. A scar on her forehead, from a childhood fall. A small dark birthmark just above her left hip. At the time, no one thought much of them. But they'd become crucial evidence of something beyond explanation. Prayer beads. The Robertsons were a faithful family. Mass every Sunday. Rosaries. Rituals. But beneath the surface, John Robertson had a secret. Despite being a devoted Catholic, he believed in reincarnation. Ever since he read a book as a 9-year-old boy, the idea haunted him. He didn't just pray for heaven. He prayed for proof. That maybe, death wasn't the end. Florence, his wife, was not on board. To her, It was heresy. Wrong. Dangerous. Still, John held onto the belief, quietly. Police cars' revolving light, and then came the day. May 5, 1957. The girls picked out their favorite dresses. Joanna wore her favorite blue one. Jacqueline picked a yellow frock. It made her feel grown up. They laughed. They skipped ahead, just like always. Their parents walked behind. Until, screams. Tires. Impact. A speeding car, driven by a local woman who had a mental breakdown, hit both girls. Broken Heart both died instantly. Hexham went silent. The Robertsons were shattered. Candle hash for months, John begged God for a sign. Not just to see his daughters again, but to prove his belief had always been right. What happened next would shock even him. Because 18 months later, Florence became pregnant again. And this time, she was having twins. Baby, but these weren't ordinary twins. You ever hear a story that just rips your heart out? Because what happened on the morning of May 5, 1957 in Hexham, England wasn't just tragic. It was unthinkable. Girl, boy, 3 kids. 2 sisters. 1 neighborhood friend. Joanna Robertson, 11, the calm, nurturing big sister. Jacqueline Robertson, 6, her loyal shadow, full of life. And Anthony Ledden, 9, a friend from the block who was so excited to join them for the Sunday walk to church. They'd done it countless times. Same path. Same trees. Same laughter. The town was quiet. Church bells echoed. Spring air. Everything felt normal. But at 10:27 a.m., normal died. Pill automobile. A woman named Marjorie Wynne, once a mother herself, was unraveling. Her children had been taken away days before. Her mind, breaking under the weight of addiction and grief. That morning, she took a mix of barbiturates, enough to cause a total psychological break. Then, she got in her car. And then? She aimed it at the sidewalk. Bullseye the target? 3 innocent kids. Footprints. Their laughter was replaced by the screech of tires. Explosion symbol, and then, silence. Joanna died instantly. Jacqueline was barely breathing, massive head trauma, she died on the way to the hospital. Anthony Ledden held on for hours, but in the end, he didn't make it either. Witnesses later confirmed, it wasn't an accident. She did it on purpose. Police car first responders arrived to a scene that would haunt them forever. Blood on the pavement. Torn blue and yellow dresses. Stuffed animals thrown from pockets. The street where kids once laughed, now silent. Hexham, a town where nothing bad ever happened, was frozen. How could this happen on a Sunday morning? How could this happen to kids walking to church? Broken heart. Back at the Robertson home, John and Florence were setting the table, wondering why the girls hadn't arrived. Maybe they stopped to chat? Then, a knock on the door. Not a priest. Not a neighbor. Police. What came next? Florence collapsed. John didn't speak. He just stared. 4 hours. As if someone had stolen not just his daughters, but the air in his lungs. Dove hash. A few days later, the funeral. 3 tiny coffins. 1 for Joanna. 1 for Jacqueline. 1 for Anthony. The church they loved, filled with tears. The dresses they'd worn were gone. So were the dreams, the giggles, the skipping footsteps. But this is where the story turns. Because while most people only saw tragedy, John felt something else. A presence. A pull. And a voice inside that whispered, they are not gone. Not yet. Dove hash. 3 days after the accident, all of Hexham came to a stop. The bakery closed. The school gate stayed shut. Even the birds seemed quieter. Inside the church, 2 tiny white coffins rested side by side. Covered in flowers, surrounded by grief. And the sound? Not hymns. Not prayers. Just sobbing, from every pew, every corner, every soul. It was a funeral the town would never forget. House back at the Robertson house, silence settled like a curse. The toys? Still in place. The dresses? Still hanging. The beds? Still unmade, just like they left them on that final Sunday. Florence, once the heart of the home, shut down. She stopped cooking. Stopped talking. Stopped eating. Stopped believing. But John? John began doing something that terrified her more than death itself. Place of worship every night, John Robertson went to the girls' room. Not to cry. Not to remember. But to pray. And these prayers weren't for peace or comfort. They were for a miracle. Bring them back. Please, bring them back. His voice shook. His knees bled from the hours spent on the floor. Florence begged him to stop. She knew where this was heading. She was a Catholic. And what John was asking for was heresy. Church as the months passed. Florence left the church altogether. John kept attending, but his sermons were different now, personal, obsessive, dangerous. Even their priest pulled him aside. Your grief is understandable, John, but this path you're walking, it's not of God. But John didn't care. Because 8 months later, explosion symbol something happened that shook the entire town. Florence was pregnant. And instead of celebrating, she collapsed into tears. Because John? John smiled. Not a normal smile. A knowing one. A prophetic one. They are coming back, he whispered in the dark. Joanna and Jacqueline are coming home. Fearful face Florence panicked. This wasn't just grief anymore. This was delusion. A belief that shattered every part of her faith. Stop it, John, she cried. You're risking your soul. They're gone. But John? He just kissed her belly. No, they are just on their way back. And here's the thing. John wasn't wrong. Because what happened next? Baby, wasn't just strange. It was impossible. Florence Robertson's mind was splintering. Her grief? Real. Her fear? Overwhelming. But her husband John? He was somewhere else entirely. Every day, he sat in the dead girls' room, whispering to their toys, folding their tiny dresses, and talking to the souls he claimed were still there. They are here, Florence. Can't you feel them? Florence begged him to stop. You're breaking what's left of us, John. But John wasn't shaken. He was certain. Syringe even as Dr. Margaret Thornton, their calm, experienced physician, checked Florence month after month, she confirmed. White heavy check mark 1 pregnancy. White heavy check mark 1 heartbeat. White heavy check mark 1 baby. No twins, John. I've checked. But John? He just smiled. There will be 2. Just like before. Wilted flower Florence, trapped between a crumbling faith and a husband whose obsession was growing dangerous, broke. She told friends she might leave. She couldn't take hearing the word, twins, anymore. Not when her daughters were buried, not waiting to be reborn. Then came October 4, 1958. Stopwatch # exactly 18 months to the day after Joanna and Jacqueline were killed. Florence went into labor before dawn. She was rushed to the hospital. John followed, eyes glowing with the kind of faith that scares people. This is it, he whispered in the waiting room. They are coming back. Woman # inside, Dr. Thornton was calm, confident. The baby was expected, after all. But then, at 3:47 a.m., a healthy baby girl was born. Dark hair. Bright, searching eyes. The room relaxed. Until. Police cars revolving light another contraction. Wait, what? Baby at 4:12 a.m., a second baby girl arrived. Everyone froze. Dr. Thornton stared, speechless. I? I only detected one fetus, she stammered. She later confessed. In 30 years of delivering babies, I've never seen a twin go undetected. But it didn't matter what the machines said. John was right. 2 daughters. Born together. Just like before. Baby bottle October 4, 1958. 2 girls. Identical twins. Born 18 months to the day after their sisters died. But what happened next would defy everything we thought we knew about life, death, and DNA. Man ## when the hospital staff told John Robertson he had twin daughters, they expected shock. Maybe joy. Maybe tears. Instead, he just smiled and whispered. Of course, there are 2. Joanna and Jacqueline have come home. Everyone thought he was just overwhelmed. But they were wrong. He meant exactly what he said. Baby, the twins were named Gillian and Jennifer. They were identical. Literally. 1 egg. 1 genetic code. Same DNA. No difference. Except, there was a difference. And it was terrifying. Microscope. As the nurses examined the babies, they noticed something that made them freeze. Jennifer, the second twin, had 2 strange markings. 1. A red raised mark on her forehead. 2. 1. In the exact spot where Jacqueline had a scar from the bucket accident. 2. 3. A dark birthmark just above her left hip. 4. 1. The same size, shape, and position as Jacqueline's old birthmark. 2. Bullseye. Identical twins shouldn't have different birthmarks. They share everything genetically. But here? One twin had the exact scars of a child who died before she was born. Camera with flash. Dr. Thornton was baffled. She had delivered hundreds of twins. Never seen anything like this. She documented the birthmarks in the hospital records. She even took photographs, noting identical DNA. Unequal features. Impossible, and yet, it's there. Woman Florence finally held her daughters. Joy flooded her heart. But then, she looked into Jennifer's eyes. And froze. They weren't newborn eyes. They were old. Deep. Knowing. A shiver ran down her spine. Jennifer looked back at her. As if to say, you remember me. Meanwhile, John Robertson? He couldn't take his eyes off Jennifer. He studied her forehead. Her hip. Every breath she took. You came back, he whispered. I knew you would. Even the nurses started whispering. He's not shocked. He's not surprised. He's waiting. But this was just the beginning. What came next would force doctors, scientists, and even psychiatrists to question everything. Because the twins would grow up. And start talking about things they should never know. Baby 18 months old. That's when everything changed. Florence Robertson thought the worst was over. She thought her twins were just twins. But what happened next would shock her so deeply, she would never sleep the same again. It started on a cold February morning, 1960. Florence was cleaning the house. The twins, Gillian and Jennifer, were playing quietly in the living room. Nothing unusual. Until Florence realized what they were playing with. And that's when her blood ran cold. Just days earlier, John had gone out to the storage shed, a place locked up since the accident. He brought back a box. It held a few things from the past. Including a chipped porcelain doll with orange hair. A blue velvet dress. A name, Margaret. Broken heart. It had belonged to Joanna, their eldest daughter who died in the crash. The doll had never been shown to the twins. It had been packed away before they were born. And yet, girl Gillian walked right up to the box. No hesitation. No confusion. She reached in, with total certainty, and pulled out Margaret. She held the doll close, gently. Exactly the way Joanna used to. Same arm position. Same smile. Then she said, "Oh, Margaret. I've missed you so much." Florence dropped the dish she was holding. How could she know the doll's name? How could she hold it like that? How could an 18-month-old child say something so specific, so emotional, so impossible? She couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. And Gillian? She just cradled the doll, as if reuniting with an old friend. But this wasn't just a fluke. This wasn't a lucky guess. This was just the beginning of something much, much bigger. Because in the weeks that followed, the twins began recalling details from a life they had never lived. Places they'd never been. People they'd never met. Memories that belonged to Joanna and Jacqueline. Woman with bunny ears, 2 toddlers. 2 toys. 2 chilling words. Bunny. I missed you. Florence Robertson watched in frozen horror as the impossible unfolded in her living room. Girl Jennifer had gone straight for Jacqueline's stuffed rabbit, a worn-out toy with 1 torn ear. She didn't sniff it curiously. She didn't ask what it was. She hugged it tight and pressed it to her cheek. Then, she whispered the name. Bunny. Not a bunny, not rabbit. Bunny. The exact nickname only Jacqueline had used. Megaphone. Florence called for John, panicked, breathless, barely able to get the words out. And when he stepped into the room and saw what was happening, he didn't smile. He didn't cry. He turned white. Then he whispered, "I told you. They've come back." Florence refused to believe it. There must be a logical explanation, she told herself. Maybe they overheard us talking about the toys. Maybe they found pictures. Maybe this is all coincidence. But deep down, she already knew. This wasn't normal. This wasn't imagination. This was memory. Calendar. Over the following weeks, the twins' behaviors grew even more bizarre. They referred to people they had never met, recognized landmarks they had never seen, reacted to smells, songs, and stories from Joanna and Jacqueline's lives. And then came the moment that broke Florence completely. Cherry Blossom Spring, 1961. The twins were 2.5 years old. Florence was folding laundry when she overheard them talking in their room. Gillian was speaking with the calm authority of an older sibling. "Do you remember when we walked to church that Sunday?" Jennifer nodded. "You were wearing your yellow dress. The one with the little buttons." Florence dropped the laundry basket. Because on May 5, 1957, the day Joanna and Jacqueline died, Jacqueline was wearing a yellow dress with little buttons. And Florence had never told anyone. Police cars revolving like something was happening inside the Robertson home. The twins weren't just behaving like Joanna and Jacqueline. They were remembering being them. Automobile explosion symbol. "Do you remember how much it hurt? There was so much blood," the screaming. These aren't lines from a horror movie. They are the actual words spoken by 2 toddlers who were never in an accident, but remembered dying in one. Gillian and Jennifer Robertson were just 2.5 years old, playing quietly in their bedroom. Florence passed by the door, until she heard something that stopped her cold. "Then the car came," said Jennifer. "It was so loud, and the lady looked angry." Florence froze. Because this wasn't a story. It was the truth, exactly as it had happened to Joanna and Jacqueline. "Do you remember how much it hurt?" Jennifer asked. Gillian nodded slowly. "I remember the blood. There was so much blood. And the screaming." Florence burst into the room. "What are you girls talking about?" The twins turned to her, calm, still, eyes too old for their faces. "We were just remembering," said Gillian. "Before we came back. That wasn't the only time." Florence began catching glimpses of impossible memories almost daily. The girls reciting the layout of their old bedroom, a room they never saw. Referencing conversations with their deceased grandmother. Recalling the names of classmates from their other life. And then came the worst part. Sleeping symbol nightmares. The twins began waking in the middle of the night, sobbing, terrified. Florence would find them huddled together, whispering. The tires were loud. She didn't stop. I couldn't move. But one moment changed everything. The girls were 3 years old. Playing with dolls. Florence heard Jennifer say. When the car hit us. I couldn't breathe. My nose and mouth were full of blood. Everything went dark. Before Florence could react, Gillian reached over and touched Jennifer's forehead. Right where that scar-shaped birthmark was. That's where you hit your head, she said gently. That's where the mark came from. Florence took them straight to Dr. Thornton. But the doctor shrugged it off. Kids have vivid imaginations, she said. They overhear more than we think. But Florence knew. This wasn't imagination. This wasn't storytelling. These were memories. And then came the most chilling moment of all. Girl Jennifer. 3.5 years old. And she said something no one could explain. Bathtub. It was bath time. The twins were playing quietly in the warm water. Florence was finally beginning to relax. Until Jennifer casually pointed to the strange birthmark on her hip and said, "This is where I got hurt when I fell on the bucket. It never stopped hurting. Even after I died." Florence nearly dropped the soap. She couldn't take it anymore. The skepticism, the denial, it all crumbled in that one moment. Because this wasn't a child being dramatic. This was something else. Something real. Camera with flash, and Florence wasn't the only one starting to believe. By 1963, whispers of the Robertson twins had reached beyond their sleepy town of Hexham. Local papers picked up the story, twins remember past lives. And before long, a name appeared at their doorstep. Dr. Ian Stevenson. Psychiatrist. Scientist. Reincarnation researcher. University of Virginia. He had spent decades traveling the globe, studying children who claimed to remember past lives. Most people laughed at his research. Florence wasn't laughing anymore. Dr. Stevenson's arrival was the moment everything changed. The girls were 4 years old, the perfect age, he said. He began with a full physical examination. And when he saw Jennifer's birthmarks, his eyes went wide. Forehead. Hip. Exact shape. Size. Texture. He compared them to old hospital records and photographs of Jacqueline. And it matched. Even the cold weather discoloration. Jacqueline's scar used to darken when it was chilly. Guess what? So did Jennifer's. Books, but that wasn't all. Dr. Stevenson interviewed John and Florence for hours, documenting every detail. The toy recognition. The memories of church, clothes, classmates. The dreams. The conversation about the car crash. What struck him the most? Not John's excitement. But Florence's resistance. She didn't want this to be reincarnation. She wanted science to explain it away. But it couldn't. Speech balloon. Dr. Stevenson would later write. This case is one of the most compelling I have ever encountered. The consistency, the witness reliability, and the physical evidence all suggest that these children possess memories not from imagination, but from another life. And here's the thing. As the girls got older, their memories began to fade. But not all of them. Speech bubble. One final test would shock even Dr. Stevenson, and it was caught on film. Woman #scales. Florence Robertson was the perfect test subject. Not because she believed, but because she didn't. She wasn't trying to prove reincarnation. She was trying to disprove it, desperately clinging to any rational explanation. And that made what happened next all the more terrifying. Microscope. Dr. Ian Stevenson didn't just interview the family. He watched the twins. He tested them. And what he found absolutely defied logic. One of his most stunning experiments was the photograph test. Camera he laid out images of dozens of people, some strangers, some friends of the deceased Joanna and Jacqueline. Florence braced herself. But the twins? Girl Gillian pointed at one image and said, "That's Mr. Ledden. He used to give us toffees after church." Girl Jennifer said, "She's the one who let us pet her dog, the little brown one that smelled funny." These weren't just guesses. They were correct. And terrifyingly specific. Automobile, but there was another side. A darker one. Both girls had crippling phobias of cars. Not the normal, loud noise kind of fear. We're talking shaking, screaming, hiding behind furniture-level terror. Especially if the car revved too fast, turned corners quickly, or worse, swerved. Gillian would cry, "It's going to happen again." Jennifer would scream, "Don't let her hit us this time." This wasn't just fear. It was trauma. The kind of trauma number 4-year-old should have, unless they'd lived through it once before. Even their personalities lined up. Just like the sisters before them. Gillian was the big sister protector, calm and watchful like Joanna. Jennifer was the clingy, affectionate shadow, just like Jacqueline. Florence started to cry during one of Dr. Stevenson's sessions. "They are becoming them," she whispered. Open book. Dr. Stevenson documented everything. For over 20 years, he followed the twins' development, publishing their story in books and medical journals. And then came the nightmares. Recurring. Terrifying. Always the same. Florence would wake up to her daughters screaming in the night. "The car. It's coming. I can't move. It hurts. It hurts." She once found Jennifer curled in a ball, sobbing. "The lady, the one in the car, she was so angry. She wanted to hurt us. Because she lost her babies too. I saw it in her eyes." Florence clutched her child, heart racing. How could Jennifer know that the woman who had hit their sisters had recently lost custody of her own children? That detail had never been made public. But the twins remembered. Florence Robertson didn't sleep in her own bed anymore. She slept on the floor between her daughters' twin beds, a light on, her heart racing, waiting for the next scream. Because every single night, the girls relived the day they died. Automobile, the car. The blood. The sound of screaming metal. The angry woman behind the wheel. The last breath before everything went dark. Florence prayed it would stop. But the worst part was when the girls comforted each other like they'd done this before. Girl Gillian to Jennifer one night, whispering, "It's okay. I know it hurt when we died, but we're safe now. We came back together, just like we promised we would." Florence froze. These weren't just nightmares. These were trauma flashbacks from a life they never lived. And it was tearing the family apart. Florence began to doubt her sanity. Was she accidentally reinforcing this? Was this grief? Or something worse? John didn't help. He believed with full conviction. "They are Joanna and Jacqueline. I know it." But Florence needed a logical answer. And she wasn't getting one. Family man, woman, girl, boy, even the older brothers, once thrilled to have sisters again, now looked at the twins like they were strangers wearing familiar skin. They saw the same handwriting. Heard the same laugh. And sometimes, the same screams. Graduation cap. Dr. Ian Stevenson stayed close to the case. And as the girls neared their 5th birthday, he warned the family. "It's going to fade. If these are memories of a past life, they rarely last past age 6. And slowly. It did. It started subtly. No more creepy statements. No more doll naming. No more late-night death dreams. Jennifer stopped flinching every time a car drove by. Gillian stopped asking for toys she'd never seen before. The conversations, the memories, the personalities began to dissolve like fog at dawn. By the time they turned 6, it was gone. Florence once asked them directly. "Do you remember when you talked about Joanna and Jacqueline?" Jennifer blinked. "Who are they?" Gillian shrugged. "Were they our cousins or something?" Florence excused herself, and cried for hours. Not out of relief. Out of grief. Because whether you believed in reincarnation or not, the connection was real. And now, it was lost. Blue Book Dr. Stevenson published their story. And to this day, it's one of the most credible, documented cases of possible reincarnation in modern history. But for the Robertson family, it wasn't about proving science. It was about losing their daughters twice. By the time Gillian and Jennifer were 20-something adults, everything about their bizarre childhood had faded into the realm of family stories. They didn't remember being Joanna and Jacqueline. They didn't remember the toy rabbit, or the birthmarks, or the night terrors. And they definitely didn't remember what they used to say about dying. When Dr. Stevenson visited them in the early 1980s, he was met with polite smiles and casual skepticism. "I mean, yeah, it's interesting," Jennifer said, brushing her hair behind her ear. "But it sounds like something from a movie, not my life." Gillian agreed. Until everything changed. It started with dreams. At first, they felt like nothing, random imagery. But one dream kept repeating itself, over and over. Gillian was in a garden. Her brothers were there. They were playing under a tall apple tree. A red bicycle sat beside a cracked stone path. And in the distance, was a white house with green shutters. She didn't tell anyone. Not even Jennifer. But after the 7th time she had the dream, Gillian started drawing it. She brought the sketch to her mother. Florence's hands shook as she studied the image. "Where did you see this?" "In my dreams," Gillian replied. "But I feel like I was actually there." Florence turned white. Because the house in the sketch? The layout of the orchard? The apple tree? The cracked path? It was their former home in Wickham, the one Joanna and Jacqueline had lived in when they were toddlers. The one Gillian had never been to. Not once. Not even as a baby. Memo Dr. Stevenson returned one final time to record this new development. He noted that although Gillian couldn't explain how she knew these details, she described it emotionally, not intellectually. "It's not like I know the house, it's like I miss it." And that was different. One night in October of 1981, Gillian woke up in tears. She called her mother at 3 a.m. "I saw her, Mom. I saw Joanna." Florence's voice cracked. "In your dream?" "No, she woke me up. She said, 'It's okay. You're doing fine now. I just wanted to say goodbye. The house is gone. The orchard's been bulldozed. The car crash is just a newspaper clipping. But Gillian still keeps the sketch of that garden. And sometimes, when she walks past old toy stores or hears certain songs, she feels something just out of reach. A shadow of a memory. A whisper of a life once lived." Bell final thoughts. Whether you believe in reincarnation, memory transfer, or the power of grief, the Robertson twins leave behind a question that science still can't answer. How did they know what they knew? Dr. Stevenson passed away in 2007, but his work with the Robertson twins remains one of the most documented and mysterious cases of possible reincarnation in the Western world. White right pointing backhand index if this story gave you chills. Share it. Comment your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe to Sanctified Sin for more true horror stories buried beneath the surface of normal life. Because sometimes, the dead don't come back to haunt us. They come back to finish what they couldn't say. The case of Gillian and Jennifer Robertson remains, to this day, one of the most thoroughly investigated and controversially compelling reincarnation stories in modern history. Dr. Ian Stevenson, whose scientific rigor made him a rare voice in the study of past life memories, cited the Robertson case as a cornerstone in his work. He uncovered white-headed checkmark over 30 verified parallels between the twins and their deceased sisters Joanna and Jacqueline. White heavy check mark medical evidence of Jennifer's birthmarks matching Jacqueline's scars, despite being identical twins. White heavy check mark behavioral patterns and phobias too complex to attribute to parental influence or imagination. White heavy check mark eyewitness testimony from community members, teachers, and even skeptics who could not explain what they saw. Books published in Children Who Remember Previous Lives, Stevenson, 1987. Reincarnation and Biology, A Contribution to the Etiology of Birthmarks and Birth Defects, Stevenson, 1997. But despite the overwhelming documentation, Stevenson never claimed certainty. This case, he wrote, provides evidence suggestive of reincarnation, not proof. He knew the limits of science. And he respected them. What makes this case unique? Jennifer and Gillian were monozygotic, identical in every strand of DNA. But Jennifer alone bore two distinctive birthmarks that matched Jacqueline's fatal injuries. One on the forehead, matching the site of head trauma. Another on the waist, matching a scar from a surgical procedure Jacqueline had undergone. From a biological standpoint, this should not be possible. Identical twins should not have such divergent and specific markings, especially those that mirror someone else's fatal injuries. Busts in silhouette. The skeptics weigh in. Critics argued. The parents may have projected expectations onto the twins. The girls might have overheard stories and subconsciously absorbed details. John's strong belief in reincarnation could have shaped behaviors unintentionally. But every claim had a counterpoint. Florence was initially deeply skeptical and even distressed by the girls' behaviors. The accuracy and timing of the twins' recollections, often before they were even verbal, made suggestion unlikely. Independent witnesses observed the phenomena before the story became public. Where it ends, and begins again. The Robertson twins eventually grew into normal young women. They forgot their past life claims. The fears, the dreams, the knowledge, all faded. But the questions remain. Why did two children, born after a tragic accident, describe events they couldn't possibly know? Why did one twin bear the physical imprint of another child's death? And if consciousness truly survives death, how often might it return, And if consciousness truly survives death, how often might it return, unnoticed? Movie camera. This was a Sanctified Sin production. If this story shook your sense of reality, bell subscribe. Thumbs up sign like. Speaking head in silhouette # share your thoughts in the comments. And remember, not every ghost story is about a haunting. Sometimes, the dead come back as children, looking for home. The twins were born identical, but one of them carried the scars of a child who had died years before they took their first breath. Their story should have ended there. But instead, it cracked open one of the most disturbing mysteries in modern science. Because this wasn't just a case of strange behavior. It was a direct challenge to everything we know about death, memory, and identity. And it all started when Dr. Ian Stevenson, an Ivy League psychiatrist, discovered something chilling. Gillian and Jennifer Robertson weren't just twins, they might have been reincarnated versions of their own dead sisters. For over 2 decades, Stevenson chased the truth. What he found stunned him, and the world. These girls, raised in a quiet English town, began speaking of people they'd never met and places they had never been. They remembered events in terrifying detail, including how they died. Not as a dream. Not as a story. But as if they were reliving it. And the physical evidence was just as horrifying. Jennifer had birthmarks in the exact same locations where Jacqueline, her dead sister, had received fatal injuries in a car crash. That shouldn't be possible. Not with identical twins, who share identical DNA. Identical, except for the scars from a death she never lived through. It didn't stop there. The twins recognized family friends they had never met. They instinctively reached for toys that had belonged to the sisters before them. They had knowledge that no one had taught them. And most terrifying of all, they had nightmares. Screams in the middle of the night. Dreams of being crushed by metal. Of a woman's face twisted in rage behind a windshield. How do children who've never heard the story relive the exact moment of someone else's death? Critics called it coincidence, imagination, parental influence. But Florence, their mother, didn't even believe in reincarnation. She fought it at first, then watched it unfold in front of her. Over 30 separate details in the twins' lives lined up perfectly with the lives and deaths of Joanna and Jacqueline. But when the girls turned 5, something strange happened. The memories began to fade. Their phobias softened. Their connection to the past unraveled, slowly, until it was gone. By the time they were 6, Gillian and Jennifer had no idea they'd ever spoken about a past life. The twins became normal children again. They grew up, went to school, got jobs, had families. They remembered nothing. Except once. At age 23, Gillian saw something. A flash in her mind. A vision of a garden, an orchard, a house she'd never been to, but described perfectly. It was where Joanna had lived before she died. Then it vanished. And it never returned. Dr. Stevenson recorded everything. The memories. The birthmarks. The nightmares. He kept interviews. Photographs. Blood tests. Witness accounts. He never claimed it proved reincarnation. But he said this: no scientific explanation fully accounts for what happened. And so the case remains, unsolved, unexplained, unforgettable. Florence died in 1979. She went to her grave unsure what to believe. But she told interviews one final truth. I don't know what happened. But I saw it. With my own eyes. John died in 1985. And until his last breath, he believed he got to hold his daughters twice in one lifetime. He called it a gift. Today, the twins live quiet lives. No memories. No signs. Just echoes. But their story still haunts the halls of science, psychology, and philosophy. Because if this case is true, if even one part of it is true, then everything we know about death is wrong. Should never have known. This wasn't just one bizarre story. It was part of a global pattern. Dr. Stevenson had uncovered something far bigger than a single family mystery. In case after case, from India to Alaska, he found children, sometimes as young as 2 years old, who could identify homes they'd never visited, recall secrets from lives they never lived, and in some cases, speak languages they had no way of learning. But the most chilling link? Birthmarks. Scars. Wounds. In the same locations and shapes as fatal injuries from a previous life. In 1978, when Gillian and Jennifer were 20, Stevenson ran one final test, a full genetic breakdown to put all doubt to rest. Result? Confirmed. They were identical twins. Same fertilized egg. Same DNA. And yet, only one had the birthmarks that matched the scars of a dead child. That should have been impossible. According to modern genetics, identical twins should look identical. The same genes. The same blueprint. No room for scars from a life that isn't theirs. Unless something else was at work. But Stevenson wasn't done. He reviewed hundreds of cases. Dozens of cultures. Decades of data. And what he discovered? 35% of children who reported past life memories had matching birthmarks or deformities linked to a violent death in the life they claimed to remember. That means 1 in 3 of these children were physically marked by something that shouldn't have survived death. These weren't just kids telling strange stories. They were walking evidence. In Turkey, a boy was born with a deep scar across his chest, and described, in graphic detail, how he had been stabbed to death in a previous life. In Burma, a girl had a deformed foot and remembered being hit by a train, exactly where the deformity now lay. All over the world, the same terrifying pattern emerged. Could trauma carry through lifetimes? Could a soul imprint not just memory, but flesh? The Robertson twins weren't an isolated case. They were part of something larger, something science still refuses to fully acknowledge. Stevenson's work, now carried forward by the University of Virginia's Division of Perceptual Studies, continues to shake the foundations of neuroscience, psychology, and spiritual philosophy. The questions raised by the Robertson twins haven't gone away. If anything, they've become more urgent. Because if birthmarks can echo bullet wounds, if toddlers can recall last breaths, and if identical twins can carry impossible differences, then maybe, just maybe, death isn't the end. Maybe we've been asking the wrong questions. And maybe the answers have been living among us all along. In the eyes of children who should know nothing, but somehow remember everything. Imagine walking into a town where everyone knows something terrifying, but no one dares to speak. That was Hexham, England. And what happened there wasn't just paranormal, it was collective psychological chaos. Clapperboard, it all centered on two little girls, Gillian and Jennifer Robertson, identical twins who remembered a life they never lived. But as Dr. Ian Stevenson dug deeper, he uncovered something far more disturbing than reincarnation theories. This wasn't just about the twins. It was about an entire town haunted by a truth so unsettling, they buried it in silence. When the twins were just toddlers, they began speaking about events they couldn't have known. Exact details of their dead sisters' lives. Names, places, memories, trauma. But what caught Dr. Stevenson off guard wasn't the girls, it was the people around them. He interviewed dozens of neighbors, teachers, and townsfolk. And one by one, a pattern emerged. They all had seen something. And they were all terrified to admit it. Take Mrs. Eleanina Hartwell, their nursery school. Take Mrs. Eleanina Hartwell, their nursery school teacher. She had held her silence for years, until Stevenson asked the right question. She confessed something chilling. Jennifer, at just 3 years old, had drawn detailed images of the car crash that killed her sisters. Accurate sketches of the twisted wreckage. The exact road. Even the look on the driver's face. Those drawings were made by someone who had been there, she whispered. Someone who had seen what happened. She destroyed the images. She told no one. Because she was afraid. Then there was William Davies, the local postman. During his routine stops at the Robertson house, he overheard the twins talking, but not like kids. They spoke about dead neighbors. People who had died years before the twins were born. And they mentioned intimate details, things not in obituaries, not in town records, things only the dead should know. They weren't guessing. They were remembering. It was now undeniable. This wasn't just a pair of haunted children. This was a haunted town. The people of Hexham weren't silent because they were skeptical. They were silent because they were scared. Scared of being judged. Scared of being right. Because if the twins really had lived before, what else could be true? Dr. Stevenson's files are filled with notes not just on reincarnation, but on community trauma. Fear spread like infection. Teachers, neighbors, shopkeepers, they all knew, but they couldn't bring themselves to face it. And that silence? That fear? That's what makes this case so unique. It wasn't a story of just past lives. It was about a community that saw the impossible, and looked away. In the end, Gillian and Jennifer grew up, and their strange memories faded. But the damage was done. A town had come face to face with a mystery that science still can't explain. A mystery that refused to stay buried. Even now, decades later, people whisper about Hexham. Because behind the quiet homes and ordinary faces, there's a secret. They witnessed something that broke reality, and no one was ready to face it. Started as a faint pink patch, but by her 3rd birthday, it had darkened into a jagged line that mirrored the scar her deceased sister Jacqueline had received in the fatal crash. Another, on her side, perfectly matched the shape, size, and placement of a post-mortem injury described in Jacqueline's autopsy. And here's the kicker, Jennifer's twin, Gillian, genetically identical in every way, had no marks at all. Dr. Stevenson knew this wasn't just rare. It was impossible. He brought in expert after expert, desperate for a rational answer. Geneticists, dermatologists, embryologists, all studied the photos, the blood tests, the case history. And every single one of them came to the same conclusion. This shouldn't be happening. One of the most respected voices among them, Dr. Margaret Fitzgerald of Cambridge, gave Stevenson her final assessment after reviewing the case for over a year. These marks do not follow any known laws of genetics or embryology. Given that these children are monozygotic twins, this is not just unexplainable, it's impossible. That word kept coming up. Impossible. But the trauma? That was all too real. Inside the Robertson household, what started as a miracle became a slow-motion breakdown. Florence, once a vibrant and strong mother of 5, was now slipping away. Insomnia. Panic attacks. Depression so deep she sometimes struggled to leave her bed. To the outside world, it was a grieving mother recovering from loss. But inside, Florence was fighting a war she couldn't explain to anyone. "How do you tell your doctor," she once asked Dr. Stevenson, "that your children remember being murdered? That you look into their eyes and see the daughters you already buried?" The twins' older brothers weren't spared either. They were just kids, grieving their sisters, and then suddenly, those sisters came back. In different bodies. Younger, but somehow, the same. It wasn't comforting. It was confusing, uncanny. They began having dreams where Joanna and Jacqueline would visit them. But they didn't offer peace. They whispered things like, "Death isn't real. We're not the only ones who returned." And then there was John Robertson, the father who had prayed for proof. He had begged for his daughters to come back. And he got what he wanted. But the cost was everything. Neighbors started avoiding him. Friends called him disturbed. His business tanked. And worst of all, the Catholic Church asked him to stop attending. They said his belief in reincarnation was heretical. He was contradicting sermons, speaking openly about his daughter's return. In 1982, 3 years before his death, he looked Stevenson in the eyes and said, "I got what I prayed for. But I never realized that proof would be so terrifying to live with." This wasn't just a mystery of birthmarks or strange memories. It was a psychological earthquake that ripped through an entire family. They didn't just witness something supernatural. They had to live with it. Every single day. A mother unraveling. Sons haunted in their sleep. A father cast out for believing his own truth. And 2 girls, who carried the legacy of the dead. In their minds. In their behaviors. And in one case, on her very skin. The story of the Robertson twins isn't just about reincarnation. It's about what happens when the impossible comes knocking at your front door. And won't leave. Police cars revolving light. Imagine your child pointing to a scar they were never born with, and saying it remembers being hurt. Not they, the mark. This is exactly what happened with Jennifer Robertson, one half of a set of identical twins whose story would become one of the most chilling mysteries in modern science. Bullseye identical twins share the same DNA. The same genetic blueprint. The same everything. But Jennifer had a birthmark. Gillian didn't. And not just any birthmark, a scar in the exact same location where her deceased sister, Jacqueline, was fatally injured in a car crash. But it gets worse. That scar? Heavy checkmark hash got darker when it was cold. Heavy checkmark hash hurt during storms. Heavy checkmark hash, and most terrifying of all, Jennifer said the mark remembered the pain. "It feels sad," she told her mom, touching her forehead. "It remembers getting hurt." She was 3. Dr. Ian Stevenson had studied over 2,500 cases of children who claimed to remember past lives. But this one broke him. Because it wasn't just Jennifer's words. It was her body. He documented 14 other cases where kids were born with marks that matched the fatal wounds of people who died before they were born. Stab wounds. Gunshots. Burns. Scars no child should have. And they didn't just match in location, they matched in texture, sensitivity, and even emotional reaction. It was as if their bodies were haunted. Dr. Stevenson believed that if reincarnation was real, it didn't just bring back memories, it brought back trauma. These children, he wrote, are carrying the scars of someone else's death. But could there be another explanation? He explored everything. Crystal ball telepathy? Too vague. Couldn't explain the physical marks. Genetic memory? Sounds cool, but genes don't store accidents. Family man-woman-girl suggestion from parents. That couldn't explain the spontaneous, detailed memories kids shared before anyone told them anything. One child described his past death, down to the exact license plate of the car that hit him. Dr. Stevenson spent the last years of his life obsessed with this one question. If not reincarnation, then what? He confessed in his private journal in 1979. I cannot honestly say that I believe in reincarnation in the traditional sense. But I also cannot deny what I've documented. He had photographic evidence. Autopsy records. Eyewitnesses. Hundreds of cases across the globe. And yet, no scientific explanation. By the time he died in 2007, Dr. Stevenson left behind a vault of documentation so massive, it's still being analyzed by researchers today. His conclusion? Whatever this is, it's real. And we are nowhere near understanding it. So here's the challenge for you, the viewer. Do you believe these children were remembering past lives? Or are we witnessing a glitch in our understanding of human consciousness? Because if Jennifer's scar, and thousands of others like it, are more than just random, then death might not be the end. It might just be the beginning. Skull repeat button. Police cars revolving like what if science couldn't explain you? What if your childhood memories weren't yours? And your scars belong to someone who died before you were born? This isn't fiction. This is the true story of the Robertson twins, a case so disturbing, it shattered the limits of science and haunted the world's top researchers for decades. Dr. Ian Stevenson spent his life chasing one mystery. Why do certain children remember lives they never lived? But the Robertson twins weren't just another case. They were the tipping point. Because their story combined everything. Biological impossibilities. Behavior no child should exhibit. Broken heart emotional trauma no child should feel. Speaking head in silhouette # verifiable memories of events they never experienced. Science advances by acknowledging what we cannot yet explain, Dr. Stevenson wrote in his final report. And this, we cannot explain. Let's rewind. Two identical twin girls, same DNA, same womb, same everything. But one had birthmarks that shouldn't exist. One had memories of a car crash she never lived through. Both acted like their dead sisters, with uncanny precision. Their parents were terrified. The town of Hexham? Silenced by fear. And Stevenson? He couldn't look away. This case didn't just suggest reincarnation. It threatened the foundation of modern science. That's why Dr. Stevenson stopped trying to prove reincarnation and started documenting what he called anomalous phenomena, events so bizarre, so real, so undeniable, that they forced us to ask, is human consciousness bigger than the brain? He didn't claim to have answers. He had evidence. And it was stacking up fast. Fire enter the next generation of researchers, armed with brain scans, DNA sequencing, and massive global databases. Bullseye their mission? To verify the unexplainable. Today, at the University of Virginia's Division of Perceptual Studies, Dr. Jim Tucker carries on Stevenson's work, investigating hundreds of eerily similar cases around the world. But none quite like the Robertsons. So where are the twins now? Gillian and Jennifer are in their 60s. They live private, quiet lives. They don't do interviews. They rarely even speak to each other about what happened. But in 2010, Gillian finally broke her silence. I don't remember saying or doing those things. But I trust my parents. I trust Dr. Stevenson. Something happened to us. I don't know what it was. But it was real. Jennifer? She won't speak publicly. But close friends say she has dreams. Disturbing dreams. Of moments, places, and faces, from before she was born. And here's where it hits you. What if you had dreams that weren't yours? Thought balloon, what if your scars had stories they never told you? Movie camera, what if your childhood wasn't your beginning, but your continuation? The Robertson case is still unsolved. It's not about ghosts. It's not about beliefs. It's about what happens when reality cracks, and something else bleeds through. Whether we call it reincarnation, Stevenson wrote, or something else entirely, we must remain open. Because whatever this is, it's real. It's happening. And we still don't know what comes after death. But thanks to the twins, we know the door might not be closed. Just slightly ajar. Waiting. What does it mean to be you? If memories, personality, even trauma can carry from one life to another, then where does identity truly begin and end? Are we a single thread, or part of something far more continuous and complex? For centuries, philosophers and theologians have debated such questions in abstract. But the Robertson twins, Gillian and Jennifer, offered something rare, a real case, deeply documented, that forced those questions into the light. If they were, in some sense, their deceased sisters returned, then what does that say about the permanence of death, or the nature of the self? Were they entirely new individuals shaped by echoes of the past? Or were they two halves of lives that hadn't yet finished? And if trauma can travel with consciousness, if the scars of a previous death can still ache in a new body, then what becomes of our understanding of healing? Could some inexplicable illnesses, deep anxieties, or emotional wounds in children be the lingering fingerprints of lives long gone? Science doesn't yet have answers. But it can no longer pretend the questions don't exist. Perhaps the most haunting dimension of the Robertson case isn't even biological or metaphysical, but emotional. If we accept, even as possibility, that Joanna and Jacqueline returned to their family in the form of Gillian and Jennifer, then we must also accept something deeply profound. That love may reach further than we know. The bond between parents and children, siblings and family, may not be severed by death, but only interrupted. The Robertsons, torn apart by the violent loss of two daughters, were given something unspeakably rare, a second chance. A few years. A fleeting window. Not to rewrite the past, but to feel their daughters again. To hear familiar laughter, see familiar gestures, hold familiar hands. Until the memories faded. It ended, just as Dr. Stevenson had predicted. Around age 5, the memories dissolved. The girls stopped speaking of things they couldn't have known. They became themselves, fully and naturally, living lives untethered to tragedy. But what lingered was the impact on their family, their town, and the scientific world still chasing answers. It was as though, for a brief time, two timelines had touched. Two lives had overlapped. And love had refused to let go without saying goodbye. The story of the Robertson twins challenges everything we think we know. About death. About consciousness. About the limits of science, and the mysteries that may lie just beyond its reach. Their case left behind more questions than answers. But perhaps that's the point. Some stories don't exist to be solved. They exist to show us that the world is still deeper than we understand, and that even in the darkest, most inexplicable corners of life, something beautiful and mysterious might still be at work. Something that binds us. Something that remembers. Something that, somehow, endures.